Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a Victorian morning where the light is thin, the air smells faintly of coal smoke, and your day begins long before your body has voted yes. You are not waking to an alarm clock so much as to the slow creep of noise. Cartwheels outside, a neighbor coughing through the wall, a factory whistle somewhere far off, but loud enough to feel personal. You lie there for a moment, staring at a ceiling that has seen better decades, already aware that comfort is not really part of the plan. This is one of those lives that looks tidy in old photographs, but feels much less cozy from the inside. You probably won't survive this, not because of anything dramatic, but because the exhaustion alone would finish you off by Wednesday. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before dawn because most Victorian men do. Electric light hasn't arrived yet, and daylight is precious. Waking late isn't just lazy, it's faintly immoral. Productivity, even before breakfast, is already tangled up with your sense of worth. You swing your legs out of bed and feel the chill immediately. Homes are cold, even in houses that would later be described as well-appointed. Firewood costs money, coal costs money, and heat is something you ration like patience.
Your bedroom is small, practical, and faintly damp. Wallpaper peels in polite little corners. The bed itself is narrow, stuffed with horsehair or straw, and somehow both lumpy and unforgiving. Historians still argue whether Victorian mattresses were genuinely worse for sleep, or whether modern backs have simply grown too soft to appreciate them. Either way, you slept lightly, waking several times in the night, because that's just normal. Deep, uninterrupted sleep is a luxury of the future.
You reach for your clothes, which were likely laid out the night before. A Victorian man doesn't wander around in a robe contemplating life choices. You dress with purpose, even now. But first, you wash, sort of. There's no hot tap waiting for you. You splash cold water from a basin onto your face, bracing yourself as if this counts as moral training. Soap exists, yes, but it's harsh and used sparingly. Cleanliness matters, but so does toughness. A little discomfort is supposed to build character, which is convenient because everything is uncomfortable. As you wipe your face with a rough towel, you notice the smell. Coal smoke clings to everything: your clothes, your hair, your sense of optimism. In London especially, the air is already thick by morning. One mainstream historical fact that surprises modern listeners is just how early industrial pollution started shaping daily life. Fog isn't just fog. It's soot and smoke and chemical residue, all blending into what Victorians casually call the air. You breathe it in because there's no alternative, and because everyone else is doing the same. You dress in layers that look dignified but feel restrictive. Shirt, waistcoat, trousers, suspenders. Each piece fastens carefully, deliberately. Buttons take time. Nothing about this is rushed, even though you're already aware of the clock. Clothing signals respectability, and respectability is currency. Even if you're poor, your clothes must look controlled. Wrinkled or mismatched garments don't suggest creativity, they suggest moral failure. No pressure. A quirky tidbit slips in here. Some Victorian men believed that dressing too quickly could shock the body and cause illness. There's a genuine fear of sudden transitions: hot to cold, sleep to wakefulness, rest to movement. You pause between layers, letting your body adjust, as if you're a delicate instrument rather than a man about to spend 12 hours working. Modern you would call this procrastination. Victorian you calls it health. As you finish dressing, you check yourself. Not in a mirror necessarily, but in feeling. Do you feel composed, controlled, awake enough to be seen by others? Masculinity here isn't loud or expressive. It's quiet, contained, and slightly tense. You're supposed to move through the world without complaint. Pain is private. Fatigue is normal. Joy is scheduled for later, maybe. The household around you begins to stir. If you live with family, there's a choreography to this hour. Everyone knows where to step, who speaks first, who stays quiet. If you're lodging alone or with other men, there's still an unspoken agreement not to linger. Bathrooms, such as they are, must be shared. Space is limited. Silence is polite. You glance toward the window. Dawn arrives slowly, filtered through smoke and grime. The street outside is already awake. Milk carts waddle past. Someone is sweeping a doorstep, even though it will be dirty again by noon. This, too, is a small act of respectability, maintaining order in a world that resists it. Historians still argue whether Victorian men genuinely believed these routines made them morally superior, or whether they simply learned not to question them. From inside the moment, it doesn't feel ideological, it just feels like life. You don't ask why the day begins this way, you only know that it does, and that failing to meet its expectations carries consequences. Lost wages, social judgment, quiet shame. Your stomach growls faintly, but breakfast comes later. Right now, the goal is readiness. You straighten your posture, almost unconsciously. Slouching suggests weakness. You pick up your hat, because a man does not step outside bareheaded unless he wants to be mistaken for someone who doesn't care. Before leaving the room, there is a brief pause. Not reflection exactly, there's no time for that, but awareness. This is the moment where the private self finishes and the public self begins. Whatever you dreamed, whatever aches linger in your joints, whatever doubts flickered in the night, they stay here. The version of you that steps into the day is quieter, firmer, and slightly more tired than you admit. And with that, you move toward the door, already thinking ahead to the rhythm of streets and schedules waiting just beyond it, carrying the weight of another Victorian day that has only just begun. You remain indoors a little longer, because the Victorian morning is not something you rush unless you absolutely must. This part of the day is about preparing yourself to be seen. Respectability doesn't switch on the moment you wake. It's assembled carefully, piece by piece, like your clothing. You move through the familiar motions again, checking buttons, smoothing fabric, making sure nothing looks careless. A careless man is assumed to be careless in all things, including morality, finances, and self-control. No one says this out loud, but everyone behaves as if it's true. Washing, such as it is, continues in stages. Hands are rinsed again, fingernails inspected. Hair is adjusted with a comb that has seen years of loyal service. There's no styling for expression here, only neatness. Victorian grooming manuals genuinely advised men to avoid excessive attention to appearance, warning that vanity could weaken character. Historians still argue whether this advice reduced actual vanity or simply drove it underground, where it could thrive quietly without witnesses. You shave if you can afford the time and equipment. Straight razors are sharp, unforgiving things, and a rushed hand invites blood before breakfast, which feels like an unnecessary complication. Some men shave daily, others every few days, depending on fashion, occupation, and how much pain they're willing to tolerate at dawn. There's a faint metallic smell as the blade meets skin, followed by the sting of cold water again. Aftershave exists, but it's usually alcohol-based and aggressive, more punishment than pleasure. You apply it anyway, because a clean face is a respectful face. A mainstream historical fact settles in here. Victorian Britain was obsessed with the idea of self-discipline. From diet to posture to emotional restraint, the belief was that a well-regulated body produced a well-regulated society. Your morning routine isn't just hygiene, it's rehearsal. You are practicing being the kind of man who doesn't complain, doesn't indulge, and doesn't visibly struggle, even if all three feel tempting before sunrise. Clothing becomes more precise now. You adjust your collar, which is stiff and mildly hostile. Detachable collars are common, starched until they could practically double as furniture. There's a persistent rumor among modern historians that these collars were responsible for countless headaches and sore throats, though Victorians themselves rarely complained in writing. Historians still argue whether that silence reflects genuine acceptance or simply the cultural expectation to endure discomfort without comment.
You fasten your waistcoat, feeling its gentle pressure remind you to stand straight. Slouching is difficult in Victorian clothing, which might explain why posture mattered so much. It was physically enforced. There's a small, almost comforting sense of containment in this. The clothes hold you together, quite literally. Whatever uncertainty you woke with is now strapped, buttoned, and tucked away.
A quirky tidbit slips through the quiet. Some Victorian men believed that exposing the chest to cold morning air could cause internal chills, leading to long-term weakness. As a result, undershirts were worn year-round, even in summer. You feel the layers already, warming slowly, trapping heat and the faint scent of yesterday's labor. Freshness is relative. Clean enough is usually good enough. You check your boots next. Polished boots signal diligence. Mud suggests neglect. You wipe them again, even if they're already clean, because repetition feels reassuring. It's easier to control leather and laces than the uncertainties waiting outside. There's a small ritual to tying them, one you've repeated so often your hands do it without instruction. This is muscle memory, but it's also identity. This is who you are when no one is watching. If you share your home, voices murmur softly now. A kettle may be heating. Someone coughs behind a closed door. You don't linger. Lingering implies leisure. You glance again at yourself, perhaps catching a warped reflection in a small mirror or a darkened window. The image looking back is serious, already faintly tired, but composed. That's the goal. Not happiness, not excitement, composure. Victorian masculinity values steadiness over enthusiasm. You are meant to be reliable, not radiant. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on restraint made Victorian men emotionally healthier or quietly miserable. From your position inside the moment, it doesn't feel like a philosophical debate. It feels like gravity. This is just how things fall. You collect the small items that complete you. Watch, keys, gloves. The watch is important, not just practically, but morally. Timekeeping is virtue. Being late is not merely inconvenient, it's a personal failing. Pocket watches are checked obsessively, even though most clocks disagree with one another. You trust yours anyway. Trusting your own watch feels like trusting yourself. There's a final pause before you leave the room. It's brief, barely noticeable, but it's there. You square your shoulders. You inhale, tasting coal smoke and soap. You step fully into the version of yourself meant for public view. The door opens, hinges sighing softly, and the private quiet of washing and dressing slips behind you. What waits ahead will demand energy, patience, and silence in equal measure. But for now, at least, you are prepared as a Victorian man is ever expected to be. You finally arrive at breakfast, though it's less a reward and more a continuation of discipline. Victorian breakfast is not about indulgence. It's about starting the engine without exciting it too much. You take your seat with the quiet seriousness of someone who understands that even eating can be done incorrectly. The room is still cool. Light filters in through a window that has been wiped but never quite clears. The table is set simply. No dramatic spreads, no towering stacks of food, unless you are extremely wealthy, in which case this entire routine would look very different. For most Victorian men, breakfast is modest, predictable, and guided by theories about digestion that feel oddly judgmental. A mainstream historical fact settles in early. Victorians believed that the stomach was deeply sensitive to timing, temperature, and mood. Eating the wrong thing at the wrong hour could supposedly derail your entire day, morally and physically. So breakfast foods are chosen carefully. Bread, porridge, maybe eggs. Meat appears sometimes, but always with a sense of restraint, as though too much pleasure before noon might unbalance your character. You sit upright, because slouching at the table is frowned upon. Table manners matter, even if no one else is watching, especially if no one else is watching. You butter bread slowly, evenly, resisting the urge to rush. The knife scrapes softly, a sound you've heard thousands of times. There's comfort in that repetition. Tea or coffee waits nearby, steaming gently. Coffee is gaining popularity, but tea still rules the morning. It's warm, reassuring, and socially approved. Sugar may be added, but not excessively. Excess of any kind suggests weak self-control. You sip carefully, mindful of the heat. Burns are unpleasant, but also embarrassing. There's no sympathy for a man who scalds himself at breakfast.
Newspapers appear, folded neatly. Reading during breakfast is common, but not everyone approves. Some argue it distracts from proper digestion. Others believe it sharpens the mind. Historians still argue whether Victorian men actually enjoyed these debates or simply liked having something to argue about before work. Either way, you skim headlines, absorbing just enough to stay informed without becoming emotionally involved. Strong reactions are saved for appropriate occasions, which this is not.
A quirky tidbit floats by. Some Victorians believed that reading unsettling news while eating could cause indigestion or even moral decay. As a result, lighter sections were preferred in the morning. Shipping updates, society notes, advertisements promising vitality in conveniently bottled form. You glance at one such ad and briefly wonder if a tonic made of herbs, alcohol, and optimism could really fix everything. Then you move on. Conversation, if it happens, is minimal. Breakfast is not the time for heavy discussion. Voices stay low. Topics remain safe. You might comment on the weather, though it smells more like smoke than rain. You might mention the time, because time is always relevant. The clock ticks softly nearby, reminding you that this pause has limits. You eat steadily, not quickly, not slowly. There's a correct pace, though no one explains it. You simply learn it over time, through disapproving glances and subtle corrections. A Victorian man is expected to know these things instinctively, even though they're learned through quiet trial and error.
Historians still argue whether this obsession with moderation actually improved health. Some men lived long lives, others collapsed at 40, worn down by stress, pollution, and diets that valued restraint over nutrition. From your seat at the table, it's impossible to tell which category you'll fall into. You eat what's in front of you and hope for the best. There's a faint awareness of hunger even as you finish. Breakfast is rarely enough to feel full. It's meant to sustain, not satisfy. Satisfaction is considered dangerous. It might make you complacent. You wipe your mouth carefully, folding the napkin with care. Small gestures matter. They signal order. As you rise from the table, there's no lingering. No second cup unless time and status allow it. You glance again at the clock, adjusting your watch by instinct. The day is already moving. Breakfast ends not when you're done eating, but when it's time to be done. You step away with a quiet sense of readiness, carrying the warmth of tea and the weight of routine with you. The outside world waits, loud and indifferent. But for now, you've completed this small, structured ritual. Another box checked. Another moment of order imposed on an unpredictable day. And with that, you prepare to leave the table behind, already shifting your focus outward toward streets, schedules, and the long stretch of hours ahead. You step outside, and the day makes itself known immediately. The door closes behind you with a dull, final sound, and the street greets you without ceremony. Victorian streets are never quiet, not really. Even early in the morning, there's movement everywhere. Boots on stone, wheels on cobbles. The
the low murmur of voices already warmed up for the day. You inhale, and the air tastes like smoke, damp brick, and yesterday's labor.
This is where the private world ends completely. Inside, you could adjust, pause, reconsider. Out here, you move with purpose, or you get in the way. You set off, hat settled firmly, eyes forward. Lingering on the doorstep is a small but noticeable failure. The street belongs to those who know where they're going.
Buildings loom close together, their brick faces darkened by soot. Windows reflect a distorted version of you, elongated, fragmented, briefly multiplied. You pass shop fronts not yet open, their signs hanging patiently, promising goods and services you may never have time to enjoy. The city feels awake but not alert, like a body stretching before a long shift.
A mainstream historical fact slides into view. Victorian cities expanded faster than their infrastructure could comfortably support. Streets are crowded, not because people enjoy closeness, but because there's nowhere else to go. You navigate around carts, puddles, and other pedestrians with practiced ease. There's an unspoken system here. Eye contact avoided, movements anticipated, apologies rare. Everyone is late for something, even if they're technically on time.
Horses dominate the street. You hear them before you see them. Hooves striking stone, harnesses creaking, the occasional sharp snort. The smell follows close behind. Horse manure is everywhere, collected later but very much present now. Historians still argue whether Victorians were more bothered by this smell or simply accepted it as part of urban life. Judging by how little anyone reacts, you suspect acceptance won. You walk briskly, but not hurriedly. There's a balance to strike. Too fast suggests panic. Too slow suggests idleness. You aim for purposeful. Boots scuff lightly as you go, your stride steady, rehearsed over years of repetition. This walk is not exercise, it's transit. Your body is a tool meant to carry you efficiently from obligation to obligation.
As you move deeper into the street, the crowd thickens. Clerks, laborers, messengers, all flowing in similar directions. Class reveals itself subtly, in clothing quality, posture, confidence. You don't stare. Staring invites confrontation, or worse, recognition. Everyone is watching everyone else, just enough to know where they stand. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Some Victorians believed that walking too quickly through cold morning air could damage the lungs. Others argued that brisk walking was essential for health and moral vigor. Historians still argue whether either camp had evidence, or whether both simply enjoyed lecturing others. You split the difference, walking at a pace that feels safe and respectable, hoping your lungs will forgive you.
Street vendors begin setting up. You pass barrels of produce, stacks of newspapers, baskets of bread covered loosely with cloth. A man calls out the day's headlines, his voice practiced and rhythmic. You don't stop. Stopping costs time, and time is already spent before it's earned.
The city grows louder as you move. Factory whistles sound in the distance, marking the hour with mechanical certainty. Bells ring. Somewhere nearby, metal strikes metal in a steady rhythm. These sounds don't feel intrusive. They're background, like breathing. Silence would be unsettling. Silence would mean something has gone wrong. You adjust your grip on your gloves, tucking them more securely. Hands in pockets are frowned upon, unless you're walking alone, and even then, not too deeply. Body language matters. You carry yourself as though you belong here, because belonging is half the battle. Historians still argue whether Victorian men found comfort in this routine or were quietly worn down by it. From inside the moment, it feels both familiar and draining. There's reassurance in knowing exactly where to place your feet, and fatigue in knowing you'll do it again tomorrow. You step carefully around a puddle, the surface shimmering with an oily rainbow. You don't think too hard about what's in it. Thinking too hard about the street is a fast path to discomfort. Instead, you focus ahead, on the next corner, the next landmark, the steady progress of your route. As you near busier intersections, you become more alert. Carts pass close, drivers calling out warnings that sound more like habits than concern. You time your crossings instinctively, slipping through gaps without breaking stride. This is a skill learned young and perfected daily. Your shoulders relax slightly once you clear the worst of the congestion. The rhythm returns. Step, step, breathe. You're fully awake now, the morning stiffness replaced by motion. Whatever doubts lingered indoors have been pushed aside by necessity. Ahead lies the next phase of your day: transport, work, responsibility. But for this moment, you are simply moving through the city, one of thousands, carried forward by streets that never seem to rest. Your commute continues, shifting from simple walking into something more complicated, more crowded, and faintly more exhausting than it has any right to be this early. Distance matters now. Victorian cities are large, and work is rarely just around the corner unless you are very lucky or very poor. You reach the place where foot traffic thickens and choices appear. Keep walking, wait for a tram, squeeze onto a train, or combine all three in a carefully timed sequence. The railway station looms ahead, its iron and glass structure already humming with movement. Steam hangs in the air, mixing with coal smoke and breath, creating a damp haze that settles into your clothes. Trains are a relatively new miracle, and already an everyday nuisance. They promise speed, but they demand patience. A mainstream historical fact settles in. By the mid to late Victorian period, railways had completely reshaped daily life. For the first time, large numbers of men traveled significant distances to work every day. Commuting becomes normal, even expected. Time itself is reorganized around timetables, whistles, and synchronized clocks. You are living inside that shift, even if you don't think of it that way. You step onto the platform and immediately feel the press of bodies. Personal space is not a concept that survives industrialization. Men cluster together, coats brushing, boots nearly touching. Conversation is minimal. There's a shared understanding that this is not a social gathering. This is endurance. You check your watch again, because everyone does. The station clock disagrees, as usual. Historians still argue whether the constant presence of conflicting timepieces caused anxiety or simply trained Victorians to live with low-level confusion. Either way, you trust your watch. The train arrives with a hiss and a shudder. Doors open, and the careful chaos begins. You board quickly, finding whatever space you can claim. Seats are limited, and standing is common. You brace yourself as the carriage fills, bodies swaying slightly even before the train moves. The smell is unmistakable. Damp wool, smoke, yesterday's sweat, and the lingering hint of breakfast tea. As the train lurches forward, you grab a strap or rail, steadying yourself. This is not a comfortable ride. It's loud, uneven, and constantly vibrating. But it's faster than walking, and speed is worth discomfort. Progress always is. A quirky tidbit drifts through the noise. Some Victorians believed that traveling at high speeds, anything over 30 miles per hour, could damage the human nervous system. Early critics of rail travel warned of railway spine, a condition blamed for everything from headaches to moral decline. Historians still argue whether these fears were based on real medical observations or simple anxiety about rapid change. You don't have time to wonder. The train keeps moving, whether your nerves approve or not. You stare ahead or down, avoiding eye contact. Eye contact invites conversation, and conversation invites obligation. You conserve your energy. The rocking of the carriage becomes almost hypnotic. For a moment, you feel oddly suspended, neither home nor work, just in motion, carried along by iron and steam. If you don't take the train, perhaps you board a horse-drawn tram instead. It's slower, more exposed, and somehow louder. Wheels grind against tracks. Drivers shout warnings. You climb aboard, balancing carefully, and find a narrow bench already occupied by men who look just as awake as you feel. The tram rattles forward, every jolt transmitted directly to your spine. Comfort is not part of the fare.
Walking resumes once you disembark. Your boots hit the pavement again, and you rejoin the flow of pedestrians moving towards offices, warehouses, shops, and factories. This final stretch often feels longer than it is. Fatigue arrives early in Victorian days, spreading quietly through legs and shoulders.
Historians still argue whether Victorian men considered this daily exertion healthy. Walking and standing were praised as virtues, yet exhaustion was constant. From your perspective, it's simply reality. You move because stopping isn't an option. You pass familiar landmarks now, a particular lamppost, a corner shop, a building with permanently grimy windows. These details anchor you. They tell you you're close. The crowd thins slightly as people peel away towards their destinations. You feel a small, private relief each time someone steps aside, reducing the pressure by a fraction. Noise shifts as well. The general roar of transit gives way to more specific sounds. Typewriters clacking faintly through open windows, machinery humming, voices raised in early instruction. Work announces itself before you see it.
You adjust your collar again, though it hasn't moved. It's a reflex, a way of preparing. Your posture straightens. Your expression settles into something neutral and capable. Whatever you felt on the train, irritation, drowsiness, the urge to sit down and close your eyes, stays there. As you reach the final approach, you slow just a touch, enough to arrive composed rather than breathless. Arriving flustered is noticed. Arriving calm is respected. Even if the difference is only a few seconds, it matters. You take one last look at your watch. You are on time. Not early enough to be suspicious, not late enough to invite comment. Exactly right. And with that, the commute ends. The city has carried you from your door to this threshold. Ahead waits routine, hierarchy, and hours measured carefully by the clock you've been checking all morning. You step forward, leaving the motion of travel behind, and prepared to begin the part of the day that will actually count. You arrive at the place where your day truly begins, even though it feels as though you've already spent a full one just getting here. The entrance stands in front of you. Office door, shop front, factory gate, each version different in detail, but identical in expectation. This threshold matters. You pause just long enough to smooth your coat, settle your hat, and adopt the expression that signals readiness. Whatever happens inside, it starts with appearing capable. You step in and the atmosphere shifts immediately. Outdoor noise dulls, replaced by the contained sounds of work, papers rustling, machines humming, voices kept low but firm. The air smells different here. Ink, oil, dust, or cloth, depending on your trade. It's an environment designed for productivity, not comfort. Comfort would only distract. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly. Victorian workplaces were rigidly hierarchical. Everyone knows where they stand, and more importantly, who stands above them. Advancement is possible, but slow, and usually requires patience, loyalty, and the right kind of obedience. You locate your position instinctively, both physically and socially. You don't sit where you're not meant to. You don't speak unless it's appropriate. If you work in an office, you take your place at a desk that feels slightly too small. Ledgers wait, thick and serious, filled with careful handwriting that must remain neat and legible. Blots and errors are not charming. They're failures. You arrange your tools, pen, ink, paper, with quiet precision. There's a correct order to these things, though no one ever formally taught you. If your work is in a shop or workshop, you ready yourself differently. You check inventory, prepare tools, sweep a floor that was already swept yesterday. Repetition begins early.
Factories, especially, are places where time dissolves into task. The clock exists, but your attention belongs to the rhythm of labor. Historians still argue whether Victorian men found pride in this structure or felt trapped by it. From your vantage point, structure is simply unavoidable. The rules are there, visible and invisible, and navigating them well is a skill learned over years. The workday officially starts, though it's hard to say when that moment actually occurs. There's no dramatic signal. You just begin. You copy figures, assemble parts, address customers, or follow instructions issued without explanation. Questions are possible, but they must be phrased carefully so they don't sound like doubt.
A quirky tidbit slides in here. Some Victorian offices required clerks to stand rather than sit, believing that sitting encouraged laziness and poor posture. The human body, it was thought, performed best under mild discomfort. You shift your weight, feeling that theory settle into your legs. Conversation happens in fragments, a brief instruction, a quiet correction, occasionally a joke, dry and fleeting, quickly swallowed by the need to appear serious again. Laughter is allowed, but only in moderation. Excessive cheer suggests you aren't working hard enough. You become aware of the clock without looking at it. Time stretches and compresses in strange ways. The first hour feels long. The second feels longer. Eventually, the hours blur into a steady endurance. This is where boredom enters, not dramatically, but like a low fog that seeps into everything. Historians still argue whether boredom is a modern concept or whether Victorians simply didn't write about it as openly. Standing here, doing the same motion again and again, you suspect they knew it well. They just didn't consider it worth mentioning.
Your body settles into the work. Muscles learn their tasks. Hands move almost on their own. There's a faint satisfaction in competence, in knowing what you're doing and doing it correctly. Mistakes are noticed. Accuracy is rewarded, if only by the absence of reprimand. Supervision is constant, even when no one is watching. The possibility of being observed shapes behavior. You sit straighter. You keep your pace steady. You avoid looking tired, even when you are. Fatigue is a private matter.
As the morning advances, the air grows heavier. Windows may be opened slightly, but fresh air is limited. The smell of bodies and materials accumulates. You breathe shallowly, not consciously, just instinctively adapting. Everyone does. A bell may ring, or it may not. Breaks are brief and strictly timed. You take them without fuss, knowing better than to linger. Food, rest, relief, all must fit into narrow windows. You glance around, briefly, carefully. This is your world for most of your waking hours. The people here know you by habit rather than intimacy. You know their routines, their strengths, their irritations. It's a quiet community, bound together by shared obligation rather than affection. As the work continues, the sense of self recedes. You become your role: clerk, assistant, worker. The name matters less than the function. This isn't dehumanizing in the dramatic sense. It's subtler than that. It's simply how the day moves forward. And so you keep going, hour by hour, task by task, letting the structure carry you. The city outside hums on, but in here, time is measured by effort and restraint. By the time you realize how long you've been working, you've already been doing it for quite a while. The day has truly begun, and there's no stepping back now.
The hours stretch now, quietly and without apology. You've been working long enough that the novelty, if it ever existed, has worn off completely. This is the portion of the day where repetition settles in, where tasks stop feeling like actions and start feeling like conditions. You are no longer beginning work. You are simply inside it. Your hands keep moving. They copy figures, sort items, lift, count, stamp, assemble, or oversee the same small motions again and again.
The work itself may not be physically brutal, but its constancy is relentless. Victorian labor doesn't need to injure you dramatically to wear you down. It relies on time. Long, uninterrupted time. A mainstream historical fact hums along with the rhythm. The Victorian workday commonly stretched 10 to 12 hours, sometimes longer, depending on class and occupation. Breaks existed, but they were brief and tightly controlled. The idea of pacing yourself across a lifetime hadn't fully formed yet. You were expected to give your energy now and worry about the consequences later.
Your posture begins to ache in small, specific places. A shoulder tightens. A foot complains. You shift subtly, careful not to draw attention. Visible discomfort suggests weakness. You learn to be uncomfortable quietly, a skill practiced daily and perfected over years.
The room sounds the same as it did an hour ago. That's part of the problem. There's no clear marker of progress, no satisfying almost done. Just the steady presence of tasks refilling themselves as soon as they're completed. You finish one ledger page and turn to the next. You stack one crate and reach for another. The work does not congratulate you for your efficiency. It simply continues.
Historians still argue whether Victorians experienced boredom the way we do, or whether they interpreted it differently. Standing here, repeating the same action for the 100th time, you suspect boredom existed perfectly well. It just didn't come with permission to complain. Your mind wanders despite your best efforts. You think about the street outside, about the warmth of tea earlier, about how far away evening feels. You catch yourself drifting and gently pull your attention back. Daydreaming is dangerous. Mistakes happen when thoughts wander too far. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some Victorian employers believed that mental wandering could physically weaken the body, as those stray thoughts drained energy. As a result, monotonous work was sometimes seen as a form of discipline, training both body and mind to endure. You endure, whether it's improving you or not. There's a brief exchange nearby. Someone drops something. Another person offers a quiet comment. It's almost friendly, but not quite. Workplace relationships exist, but they're cautious. Too much familiarity risks being seen as unprofessional. You keep your interactions light, functional, and brief. Time slows. Or maybe it feels that way because your awareness sharpens around it. You notice the clock more often now. You don't stare, but you glance. You memorize its position. You calculate how much remains, then immediately stop calculating because it makes everything worse. Historians still argue whether this constant awareness of time was psychologically damaging. From your perspective, it's simply how the day is structured. Time is not a suggestion. It's a framework you live inside.
Your body warms from effort, even in the cool air. Layers begin to feel heavier. Sweat gathers subtly, never enough to acknowledge openly, but enough to be annoying. You wipe your hands on a cloth, smooth your sleeves, and continue. Cleanliness matters, even mid-task. The repetition becomes strangely soothing after a while. Not pleasant, exactly, but familiar. Your hands know what to do even when your thoughts lag behind. There's a small comfort in that, proof that you are competent, reliable, useful. These qualities matter more than happiness. A supervisor passes nearby. You straighten slightly without thinking. Your pace adjusts. This isn't fear so much as reflex. Authority doesn't need to speak to be felt. Once the presence moves on, you relax again, but only a fraction. Full relaxation is reserved for spaces that feel very far away from here. As the morning wears on, hunger returns, not sharply, but persistently. Breakfast feels distant now, like something that happened in another life. You tell yourself it's almost midday, though almost does a lot of work in that sentence. You swallow, adjust your stance, and keep going. Historians still argue whether Victorian diets provided enough energy for these long hours.
Looking around, you see men who have adapted, men who are struggling, and men who look as though they've been slowly shrinking into themselves for years. The workday doesn't discriminate. It asks the same of everyone.
You notice small details you've seen 1,000 times before. A crack in the wall, a smudge that never quite disappears, the way light shifts across the room as the sun moves. These details become landmarks, proof that time is passing, even when it doesn't feel like it. Your thoughts grow quieter, not because you're relaxed, but because they've learned to conserve energy. Thinking too much makes the hours heavier, so you focus on the immediate, the next line, the next item, the next motion.
There's a faint shared understanding among everyone here. No one says it, but you all know. The middle of the day is the hardest part. You're too far from the start to feel fresh, and too far from the end to feel hopeful. You exist in between. And so you continue, repeating, enduring, adjusting. The clock inches forward, almost politely, as if aware of how closely you're watching.
Eventually, though it doesn't feel like soon enough, the day will break into smaller pieces again. But for now, you remain here, in the long stretch of repetition that defines so much of a Victorian man's working life.
The middle of the day arrives not with relief, but with permission. Permission to stop, briefly. Permission to eat, carefully. Permission to exist as something other than a pair of working hands. Midday meals in Victorian life are less about pleasure and more about maintenance, like refueling a machine that's already warm and still running. You step away from your work area with quiet efficiency. There is no lingering, no stretching that looks too indulgent. Lunch is a pause, not a break. The distinction matters. You carry your food or head toward the designated eating space, already aware that time will be watching you, even while you chew.
A mainstream historical fact settles in. For many Victorian men, lunch was the largest meal they ate during the workday, but it was still modest by modern standards. It was meant to sustain, not satisfy. Heavy meals were believed to dull the mind and slow the body, which, frankly, would be inconvenient when you're expected to return to work immediately afterward. You sit or stand where you're allowed. The food itself is simple. Bread, cheese, perhaps cold meat. Maybe leftovers wrapped earlier, now slightly less appealing. If you're lucky, there's tea, lukewarm by the time you get to it. You eat steadily, not quickly, not slowly. There's a correct pace, even if no one ever taught it to you directly. Conversation exists, but it's restrained. Topics stay neutral. Weather, prices, someone's commute. Anything too personal risks discomfort. Anything too political risks argument. You chew, listen, nod, contribute just enough to seem sociable without becoming memorable.
A quirky tidbit drift by. Some Victorians believed that vigorous chewing aided moral character, not just digestion. The act of eating properly, upright posture, small bites, controlled movements, was thought to reinforce discipline. You chew thoughtfully, just in case it's shaping your soul. Your stomach reacts in its own way. Digestion is a constant concern in Victorian life. Too much food is dangerous, too little is weakening. Certain combinations are frowned upon entirely. You've absorbed these rules through repetition rather than instruction, and now you follow them without much thought.
Historians still argue whether Victorian dietary advice actually improved health or simply reflected cultural anxieties about control. From your seat, it feels like one more set of expectations layered onto an already structured day. There's an odd tension in this pause. You are eating, but you're still aware of work waiting for you. The tasks you left behind haven't disappeared. They're simply paused, like a held breath. You feel it in the back of your mind, gently urging you not to relax too much.
Someone nearby unwraps food that smells stronger than yours. You pretend not to notice, though your stomach very much notices. Envy passes quickly. Lingering on it would only make the remaining hours harder. The room carries a low hum of chewing, swallowing, cups touching tables.
It's almost soothing. Almost. If you listen too closely, it becomes hypnotic, and that's dangerous territory. You blink, adjust your posture, and take another bite. Time is shorter here. Lunch doesn't stretch the way working hours do. It moves briskly, efficiently, as if aware it's not meant to linger. You finish your food and feel that familiar combination of relief and regret. Relief that hunger is eased. Regret that the pause is ending. Before returning to work, there's a moment, a small one, where your thoughts drift. You imagine what a truly leisurely meal might feel like. Warm food, comfortable seating, no clock nearby. The thought is pleasant and immediately dismissed as impractical.
Historians still argue whether these small moments of imagination helped Victorian workers cope or simply reminded them of what they lacked. You suspect it depends on the day. You wipe your hands, straighten your clothing, and rejoin the flow back toward work. The shift is almost physical, like stepping from one room into another, where the air feels different. Your body knows the routine. It settles back into readiness with minimal protest. The work area looks unchanged, as if nothing happened while you were gone. That's part of the design. Lunch doesn't reset the day, it simply divides it. You pick up where you left off, the repetition resuming as though it had only blinked.
There's a slight heaviness now, a post-meal lull that Victorian advice warns against. You counter it by sitting straighter, focusing harder, maybe moving a bit more briskly than necessary. Productivity is a performance, and you're still on stage. A light joke slips through your thoughts. Somewhere, someone has decided that eating should make you better at working immediately afterward, and you're not convinced they tested that theory personally. The thought amuses you briefly before dissolving back into concentration.
The afternoon stretches ahead, but lunch has marked progress. You're no longer at the beginning. You're somewhere past the midpoint, even if the end still feels distant. That knowledge steadies you. And so, with crumbs brushed away and expectations firmly back in place, you continue. The day moves forward again, one measured hour at a time. The afternoon settles in like a long exhale that never quite finishes. Lunch has passed, energy has dipped, and now the day asks something different from you. Not freshness, not enthusiasm. It asks for endurance. This is the portion of the day where Victorian work reveals its true character. Not dramatic, not brutal in any obvious way, just quietly demanding. You return to your tasks with a body that feels heavier than it did this morning. Not exhausted exactly, but dulled around the edges. Your limbs still obey, but they do so with less eagerness. You adjust your stance, reposition your chair or tools, and continue. The work doesn't change to accommodate your energy levels. It never has.
A mainstream historical fact slides into place. Afternoon fatigue was so common in Victorian workplaces that it was often discussed in medical journals of the time. Doctors debated whether it was caused by poor diet, stale air, moral weakness, or simply the body protesting long hours. None of those debates shorten your workday, of course.
The room feels warmer now, even if the temperature hasn't changed. Bodies, machines, and enclosed spaces hold on to heat. You loosen nothing outwardly, but inwardly you're very aware of every layer of clothing. Wool was not designed with afternoon stamina in mind. Your attention drifts more easily now. You catch yourself rereading the same line, repeating the same motion, a fraction too slowly. Each time, you gently correct yourself. You've learned how to manage this. Small resets, a deeper breath, a slightly firmer grip. Historians still argue whether Victorian men were more mentally resilient than modern workers, or simply had fewer alternatives. From where you stand, resilience feels less like a trait and more like a habit built out of necessity. The sounds of the workplace take on a strange quality in the afternoon. They grow softer, not because they've changed, but because your mind has learned to filter them.
The repetitive clack of tools, the scratch of pens, the murmur of voices, they blur into a kind of background tide. You work inside it. A quirky tidbit drifts by here. Some Victorian factories experimented with playing music during afternoon hours, believing it could restore productivity. Results were mixed. Some workers found it energizing. Others found it maddening. You imagine trying to focus while a brass band attempts to motivate you and decide you might prefer the silence.
Supervision tightens subtly after lunch. Not aggressively, just attentively. Employers know this is the vulnerable stretch. Mistakes happen here. Accidents, too. You sense the extra glances, the slightly longer pauses near your workstation. You respond by sharpening your focus, even if it costs more effort now than it did earlier.
Your body communicates in small protests, a twinge in the back, a stiffness in the fingers. Nothing dramatic enough to acknowledge aloud. Complaints are for injuries, not discomfort. You note the sensations and file them away for later, like so many other things.
Historians still argue whether the Victorian emphasis on stoicism improved character or suppressed necessary expressions of pain. You suspect the answer depends on who you ask, and whether they've ever worked a 10-hour day without complaint. The clock advances in cautious increments. You don't watch it continuously, but you're aware of it in the way you're aware of a presence behind you. Each glance confirms what you already know. It's moving, but slowly. There's a moment where the temptation to rush appears, to speed up, push harder, finish sooner. Experience tells you this is a mistake. Rushing leads to errors, and errors lead to attention. You settle back into your steady pace. Consistency is safer than speed. A brief interaction breaks the monotony. A question, a clarification. It's minor, but it gives your mind something new to hold for a moment. You answer, exchange a nod, and return to your task. The interruption feels oddly refreshing. Your thoughts drift to the evening, not in detail, just as a concept. Home, rest, something warm. You don't let yourself linger there. Afternoon work punishes those who look too far ahead. A light joke surfaces in your mind. If endurance were a sport, Victorian workers would be accidental champions, training daily without realizing they'd signed up. The thought makes you almost smile, which you quickly smooth away. As the afternoon deepens, light shifts again. Shadows lengthen. The room looks slightly different, as if reminding you that time is in fact passing. This visual change is grounding, proof that the day is not infinite, even if it feels that way sometimes. Historians still argue whether these small environmental cues helped workers endure long hours. You find them quietly reassuring. The sun moving across a wall feels like a promise being kept. Your energy levels stabilize into something manageable. Not high, not low, just enough. You operate on this middle ground, conserving effort, minimizing unnecessary movement. You've learned how to exist here. The work continues. Always the work. But now there's a subtle shift in the air. The day is beginning to bend, just slightly, toward its eventual close. You sense it without being able to name it precisely. And so you keep going, aware of fatigue, but not ruled by it, focused on the immediate and nothing more. The afternoon asks for patience, and you give it, quietly, steadily, one moment at a time. The afternoon begins to wane, though the work does not let up. Time has shifted in subtle ways. You can feel it in the light, in the rhythm of motion, in the low hum of the building itself. But the pace of expectation remains steady. You are still inside your tasks, hands moving automatically, eyes scanning, mind partly wandering, partly anchored to the job at hand. Victorian labor demands this duality. You must be alert and engaged, yet tireless, almost invisible in your effort. You notice details you might have ignored earlier. A small draft sneaking through a window, the slight warping of a wooden floorboard, the pattern of soot along the walls. These things are unremarkable, almost mundane, yet noticing them is a form of quiet mental exercise. It keeps your mind alive when repetition threatens to flatten everything. This is one of the few ways to resist the hypnotic lull of prolonged work.
A mainstream historical fact accompanies your awareness. Victorian workplaces were notorious for their poor ventilation, especially in factories and offices located in densely packed urban areas. Men often endured days of dust, smoke, and stagnant air with little relief. Health warnings existed, but practical solutions were scarce, and employers were rarely motivated to improve conditions unless profit demanded it.
Your body signals its own subtle protests. Fingers stiffen from repetitive motion. The back tightens from prolonged posture. Eyes strain from low light or small print. You adjust invisibly, shifting weight, stretching slightly, while maintaining an air of composure. You've learned to read the language of discomfort silently, balancing endurance with survival. Complaining is not an option. Endurance is part of the contract you never signed, but follow anyway.
Historians still argue whether this forced endurance produced resilience or quietly eroded vitality over time. Some suggest it built character. Others hint it created a class of men accustomed to low-level suffering, emotionally and physically subdued. From your perspective, you simply continue. Theory does not feed a man's stomach or make his fingers less tired.
The room is alive with quiet movement. Clerks shuffle papers, machine operators adjust their belts, shop assistants measure and tally. Everyone exists in this shared rhythm, a kind of synchronized persistence. There is no overt excitement, but the collective motion provides its own understated reassurance. You belong here, even if your mind drifts elsewhere.
A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Victorian men believed that listening to the ambient sounds of labor could actually sharpen focus, as though the mechanical hums and scratching pens created a subconscious metronome for thought. You notice yourself slipping into that rhythm, almost like a meditation disguised as work. The sounds, once distractions, become anchors.
Interaction occurs sporadically. A supervisor passes, offering a curt nod. A coworker requests assistance briefly. These moments punctuate the long stretches of solitary effort. They are brief, functional, and carry little emotional weight. You respond with efficiency, not enthusiasm. Engagement is practical. Friendship is incidental. You glance at the clock without thinking too much about it. Its hands have moved noticeably since lunch, but not enough to make the day feel shorter. The late afternoon seems like a liminal space, neither here nor there, where minutes crawl yet hours march relentlessly forward. Every tick marks endurance rather than progress. Patience is the currency of survival. Historians still argue whether Victorians truly experienced these stretches as monotonous or simply accepted them as inevitable. You understand both possibilities. Acceptance is easier. Resistance is exhausting.
Your mind briefly wanders to dinner, the promise of warmth, rest, and a meal substantial enough to replace the modest lunch. The thought is comforting but fleeting. Daydreaming too long here risks distraction. Errors in the afternoon are noticed quickly. Attention must remain, however reluctantly. Hands move mechanically. You check, sort, write, measure, or assemble, depending on your occupation. Each repetition reinforces the day's structure. You have performed these motions so many times that they feel like extensions of your body. The act of work has merged with the act of being, leaving your inner thoughts to drift alongside your labor without interfering.
A small joke surfaces, barely audible in your mind. If anyone were keeping score, Victorian men would earn medals for patience alone. You allow a brief smile, just enough to notice it, then return fully to your motions. Humor exists quietly here, as a shadow companion, rather than an overt distraction. As the sun begins to lower outside, though you may not see it through the grime-coated windows, you feel the subtle shift in light and atmosphere. Afternoon light has a different quality, less harsh, more forgiving, though it cannot soften the demands placed on you. Shadows lengthen across work tables, walls, and floors. You notice them, not for beauty, but as markers of time's passage, reminders that nothing lasts forever, even a day of relentless effort. Historians still argue whether the cyclical nature of light in these long indoor workspaces had psychological effects on productivity or mood. You sense it affects you. Subconsciously, the approaching evening signals both fatigue and hope, a dual awareness that the day will end, though not soon enough for comfort.
You adjust your posture one final time, shake out stiffness in your shoulders, and focus on finishing the current task. Your body protests steadily, is with it a slow, relentless rhythm. Work, focus, endurance. There is no drama, no urgency, no crescendo. It is the hum of obligation, the quiet insistence of routine, the invisible hands shaping the day into something that seems endless, yet orderly.
You exist here, fully present and partially absent, a Victorian man moving steadily through the hours, grounded in repetition, and sustained by nothing more than habit, resilience, and the faint promise that eventually the day will end. The late afternoon wears on, and the air begins to feel different. Not colder, exactly, but heavier in the way that long days do. You notice small irritations more acutely now, the subtle ache in your lower back, the stiffness creeping up your neck, the slight cramp in your hand from repetitive motion. None of it is unbearable, but all of it reminds you that the day is still long, that endurance is the only currency that matters. You adjust your posture, shift your weight, and continue working with the quiet precision that has kept you going so far. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. Victorian men's workdays frequently extended well into the evening, particularly in industrial cities. 10 to 12-hour days were standard, and the idea of pacing oneself was almost irrelevant. Fatigue was not considered a failure. It was simply a natural byproduct of responsibility and social expectation. You feel this truth in every slow breath and deliberate movement, aware that the clock is both your ally and your overseer.
You glance around the room, noting the subtle rhythms of your colleagues. Their hands move in perfect repetition, their expressions neutral, eyes focused, yet occasionally drifting like yours. There is an unspoken solidarity here, built not on friendship, but on shared perseverance. Everyone knows the rules. Keep moving, keep quiet, keep your fatigue internalized. Breaking them would draw attention, and attention is rarely kind. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some Victorian workers carried small personal rituals, almost secret talismans of comfort, adjusting a pen just so, lining up tools symmetrically, even humming a barely audible tune to themselves. These tiny acts, unremarkable to outsiders, provided psychological stability. You find yourself performing one of these rituals almost unconsciously, aligning a stack of papers at exact angles, satisfying the subtle craving for order amid monotony. Historians still argue whether these small self-soothing behaviors had a measurable effect on productivity or morale. From your perspective, they do. They allow your mind a brief respite while your body continues its steady labor. The rhythm of repetition becomes meditative, almost hypnotic. You slip into a state where time moves strangely, simultaneously slow and fast, oppressive, yet familiar. The room grows warmer as the afternoon continues. Windows, if they exist, are coated with grime that lets light filter in unevenly. Machines, stoves, lamps, or human bodies radiate heat, creating pockets of warmth and humidity. You notice the small discomforts, the dampness on your sleeves, the slight chill where the breeze finds gaps, but you accept them.
Minor irritations are endured silently. Complaint is a luxury reserved for the home, or occasionally the pub.
The work itself is predictable now. Each motion, each calculation, each repetitive movement has been done hundreds, thousands of times. Your hands know what to do before your mind fully processes it. This is not mastery, it is habit reinforced by necessity. Mistakes are few, and you monitor them with the kind of quiet vigilance that comes from years of practice.
The process is mechanical, but your consciousness remains lightly tethered to thought, a memory of breakfast, a wish for dinner, a fleeting daydream about home. A mainstream historical fact echoes in your awareness. Office lighting in Victorian cities was notoriously inadequate, particularly in the later afternoon. Gas lamps flickered, candles dimmed, and sunlight often struggled to penetrate dust-covered windows. Eye strain and headaches were common, yet work pressed on regardless. You feel this subtly, the need to squint, the slight fatigue of your eyes, but you persist. Focus is cultivated, endurance enforced.
Interaction is minimal. Occasionally, someone drops a tool or misplaces an item, prompting a brief comment or correction. You respond with precision, neither more nor less. Social connection is incidental. Small talk exists only if it does not interfere with productivity. There is a delicate balance between engagement and distraction, and you navigate it instinctively. Your mind drifts briefly to health. Aches, stiffness, and fatigue are expected. You recall Victorian advice about posture, diet, and gentle movement between tasks. You adjust subtly. A stretch of your back, a roll of the shoulders, a shake of the fingers. These small motions prevent injury without drawing notice. Discipline is internalized. Survival is partly bodily awareness and partly mental fortitude. Historians still argue whether the relentless pace of Victorian labor was damaging or character building. Looking around, you see men who seem impervious and men who appear quietly worn down. You cannot tell which category you truly belong to, only that the day must continue, that the work cannot pause, and that the clock is inexorable. Time drifts onward, marked by small cues. The shifting light, the soft hum of machines, the subtle collective rhythm of labor. Your energy stabilizes into a measured, sustainable state. You are neither alert nor exhausted, just capable. You move with precision, efficiency, and silent patience, understanding that the remaining hours will demand the same quiet endurance as the ones already past.
And so, hour by hour, motion by motion, you persist. The late afternoon stretches on. You exist in the rhythm of Victorian labor, carried forward by repetition, guided by expectation, and sustained by habit. The day is far from over.
The day edges closer to evening, though the pace of work remains unchanged. You feel it in the subtle weariness of your limbs, the quiet ache behind your eyes, and the low hum of endurance that has been building since morning. Yet there is a faint shift in the atmosphere, a sense of nearing closure, however distant. You are still working, still moving, still performing each motion with careful precision, but the air carries the faint promise that this rhythm will eventually conclude. A mainstream historical fact settles in alongside your awareness. Victorian men often worked 6, sometimes 7 days a week, depending on occupation. Leisure was rare, carefully rationed, and often brief. Evenings, when they arrived, were valued intensely, not for grand adventures, but for small comforts: a warm meal, a quiet room, a moment to relax. This anticipation of simple relief carries you forward, even as your body protests.
You notice the small details of your workplace more keenly now. The faint shifting of dust on surfaces, the way light falls differently across a table, the slight wobble of a chair or a desk leg you've seen countless times. These things are unremarkable, but noticing them creates a rhythm in your mind that is separate from the repetition of labor. It is a mental anchor, keeping you connected to the passage of time and the physicality of your surroundings.
A quirky tidbit drifts through. Some Victorian men would carry small tokens of comfort with them at work: a smooth stone, a coin with a faint engraving, a scrap of cloth from home. These items offered tiny reassurance, grounding them in a private world amid public labor. You do not carry such a thing, yet you imagine it, letting the idea offer a brief mental reprieve. Historians still argue whether these small rituals had measurable effects on productivity or morale. From your vantage point, their value is obvious. The mind, like the body, requires sustenance, and these fleeting comforts provide just enough energy to keep moving through the long, relentless hours.
The work itself continues with the same constancy as before. If you are a clerk, your pen scratches ledger pages, entries made with disciplined care, mistakes avoided. If you are in a factory, your hands adjust machinery, monitor moving parts, or assemble components in unchanging repetition. Time here is a measured succession of motions, each one familiar, each one necessary. A subtle shift occurs in your perception. The late afternoon light softens slightly, spilling in through dusty windows. Shadows lengthen, and the room feels marginally less harsh than it did an hour ago. Your mind notices the change, almost imperceptibly, and takes comfort in it. Time is moving forward. The day is progressing. Relief, however distant, is coming. Interactions remain minimal. Occasionally, someone requests assistance or offers a brief remark, but conversation is restrained. Words are tools, not social indulgences. You respond precisely, efficiently, and return to your own work. The silence that surrounds you is not oppressive, it is functional, a framework within which you operate best. Your body begins to protest in more specific ways. Historians still argue whether the relentless repetition of Victorian labor was physically detrimental or whether bodies adapted over time. From your own experience, adaptation is real, though it comes at a subtle cost. Fatigue lingers beneath the surface, present but manageable. You learn to move efficiently within these constraints, balancing effort with necessity. Time becomes a series of small markers rather than grand milestones. A supervisor's passing glance, a faint change in the room's temperature, the subtle vibration of machinery. These are all cues that the hours are progressing. You attune yourself to them, using them as mental landmarks. Each one confirms that the day is not infinite, even if it sometimes feels that way. A light joke surfaces in your mind. If Victorian men were secretly athletes, the sport would be endurance, practiced quietly and without fanfare. You allow yourself the brief amusement, though you quickly return to your tasks. Humor is a fleeting companion, helpful in small doses, but never indulgent.
The rhythm of work carries you through. Hand, eye, and mind operate in tandem, movements familiar yet deliberate. You are fully engaged and partially absent, a participant in repetition while simultaneously observing it. This duality is necessary. It preserves focus, manages fatigue, and maintains efficiency.
As evening begins to approach, the day's labor feels slightly less oppressive, though it is far from over. You are aware of the remaining hours, yet you move forward steadily, with practiced precision and quiet anticipation of the small comforts that await beyond the workplace. The persistence that has defined your day remains intact, a testament to endurance, habit, and the subtle management of mind and body. The late afternoon begins to fold into early evening, and the day feels simultaneously longer and closer to its end. Your body has learned the rhythm by now, hands moving automatically, eyes tracking motions, mind following the familiar paths of repetitive tasks. Yet despite this mechanical efficiency, there is a subtle change in perception, a quiet awareness that the day's peak labor is behind you, even if the final stretch remains ahead. You feel it in your posture, in the gentle easing of tension across your shoulders, and in the faint light that now filters through the dusty windows. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. By the late Victorian period, many workplaces began to observe a slight softening of expectations in the final hours of the workday, not out of generosity, but because human efficiency naturally declined. Supervisors understood that absolute intensity could not be sustained indefinitely, and a slower pace was tolerated as long as basic output remained. You notice this subtle leniency, almost imperceptible, and it allows for a small reprieve in your mental discipline.
Your surroundings seem quieter now. Machines continue their steady hum, pens continue to scratch across paper, and crates continue to be moved or counted. Yet there is a faint thinning in the energy of the room. Movements are precise but less urgent. Voices are functional but softer, and the weight of expectation has relaxed marginally. It is not relief exactly, but a gentle easing of pressure.
A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Victorian men kept small personal timers, or even pocket watches, as secret rituals to track the last hour of labor, finding solace in the incremental progress marked by each tick. You don't need one. Your body and mind have internalized the rhythm of the day. You sense the end approaching in subtle, almost instinctive ways. Historians still argue whether these small rituals were effective in sustaining morale, or simply served as distractions from fatigue. You suspect it is both. They provide a psychological anchor, a sense of measured progress, even as the work itself remains largely unchanged.
Your hands move with practiced familiarity. The repetition that once demanded careful attention now requires only partial consciousness. Muscle memory guides every motion, while your mind floats slightly in the background, aware of each passing minute, yet freed from the intensity of constant focus. This state is neither idle nor entirely conscious. It is endurance refined into a quiet art.
You glance around at your colleagues. Some show the subtle signs of fatigue, slightly drooping shoulders, slower motions, faintly glazed eyes. Others seem almost unaffected, moving as if the day has been no burden at all. You observe without judgment, noting the spectrum of responses to the same conditions, aware that the day treats everyone equally in its demands.
The air in the room is heavier now, warmed by bodies, machinery, and lingering residual heat from earlier hours. You adjust subtly, brushing sweat from your forehead, loosening your collar just enough to feel slightly more comfortable without attracting attention. The tactile awareness of your own body, its minor aches, its quiet endurance, guides your motions as much as habit does. Time feels peculiar at this hour. The final stretch is near, but perception is altered by accumulated hours of repetition. Minutes appear longer than they are, yet somehow the end seems closer than it should. You work steadily, hands and eyes coordinated, mind occasionally slipping into private observations. The soft sound of footsteps in the hallway, the faint creak of a door, the pattern of light shifting across a tabletop. These small markers reassure you that the day is still progressing. A light joke surfaces quietly in your mind. If endurance were rewarded in medals, Victorian men would dominate the podium, having practiced a silent, unacknowledged sport for years. You almost smile, but only enough for the corners of your mouth to twitch. Humor remains subtle and private, a gentle companion amid monotony. Interaction with others remains sparse. A brief question, a small clarification, an exchange of tools. These punctuate the rhythm without disrupting it. Words are functional, not social, and you respond accordingly. The mental space between engagement and distraction is finely balanced, allowing your mind to rest lightly while your hands continue. Historians still argue whether Victorian workers found these long stretches meditative or merely oppressive. You feel a strange mixture,
meditative in its predictability, oppressive in its relentlessness. Either way, you move through it efficiently, each motion familiar, each task habitual, each moment endured.
The softening light outside, barely visible through grime-coated windows, signals that evening approaches. Shadows lengthen, and the air carries the subtle promise of closure. You notice these cues without allowing them to dominate your awareness. The day is not over, but the final hours demand less vigilance than the peak of afternoon labor.
You adjust posture and continue, aware that this stretch requires patience more than intensity. Your hands, guided by habit, complete motions almost automatically. Your mind floats lightly over the scene, catching glimpses of small details that sustain awareness. The pattern of dust motes in a shaft of light, the rhythm of footsteps along the floor, the soft scrape of a chair being adjusted.
The day feels heavy, yes, but manageable. Experience has taught you how to navigate this stretch, balancing fatigue, attention, and endurance. You persist quietly, steadily, with the unspoken knowledge that the evening's relief is near, that the work will end, and that the day's demands, though long, are finite. The final hours of the workday stretch out in a curious space between fatigue and anticipation. You've moved through the motions for so long that your body almost performs them independently, while your mind hovers in quiet observation. Every scratch of a pen, every shuffle of a crate, every measured gesture has become second nature. Yet the knowledge that the day is nearing its end infuses the atmosphere with a subtle shift, a mixture of relief, alertness, and, oddly enough, lingering responsibility. You cannot relax entirely. The work is still there, and errors in this last stretch could be noticed and corrected, or worse, reprimanded.
A mainstream historical fact sets the context. Many Victorian men worked from dawn until dusk, often 10 to 12 hours per day, with few pauses. The labor was unrelenting, structured, and tightly supervised. Even in the final hours, the expectation was consistent diligence. You feel it in the rhythm of motion and the unspoken gaze of authority hovering, subtle yet insistent.
You notice the minor signs of collective fatigue among your colleagues: slightly drooping shoulders, slower hand movements, subtle tremors in fingers. Some lean lightly on their work tables, others adjust clothing to alleviate discomfort. There is a shared understanding here, unspoken yet tangible. Endurance is both expected and respected, but it is also quietly measured. You move through the room with the same quiet efficiency, aware of others' presence, but focused inwardly, attuned to your own pacing.
A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some Victorian offices and workshops encouraged workers to carry small personal tokens, coins, trinkets, even notes from home as miniature anchors for the mind. These helped workers endure the monotony of long days and provided a private sense of comfort amidst repetition. You do not carry such an item, but you imagine it for a moment, letting the idea briefly ease the relentless rhythm of labor. Historians still argue whether these tiny rituals significantly impacted productivity or were merely symbolic. From where you stand, they offer a mental release, a momentary detachment without abandoning the work at hand. Even imagining such comfort can sustain the mind as much as food sustains the body. Your motions are practiced and precise. Each movement has been repeated hundreds, perhaps thousands of times today, and yet the standard of care remains. If a ledger line is miscopied, a measurement misaligned, or a crate miscounted, correction is immediate and sometimes public. Discipline is embedded in habit. You respond almost automatically, adjusting without fanfare. The air in the room is heavy with warmth and the faint odors of labor: sweat, ink, dust, oil. It presses subtly against your skin, making every movement slightly more deliberate. You tolerate it, having long ago accepted discomfort as part of the daily framework. It's about attention to detail,
as it is about persistence.
Historians still argue whether the gradual physical toll of such work shortened lifespans or simply conditioned men to endure minor discomforts indefinitely. Observing your colleagues and yourself, you sense the answer lies somewhere in between. Bodies adapt, but at a cost that is quietly absorbed, rarely acknowledged. Your awareness of time is acute. The clock is no longer a distant marker. It is a companion, guiding the remaining motions. Each tick is a reassurance. Progress is happening, however slowly. You measure the remaining stretch in mental milestones. Finish this column, count this batch, file this ledger, and soon, very soon, the day will end.
A light joke surfaces in your mind, barely enough to elicit a smirk. If the Olympics ever featured endurance in mundane tasks, Victorian men would dominate, moving steadily, silently, with a near-perfect blend of precision and patience. The humor is private, a small mental escape, yet it reminds you that even in repetition, the mind can wander creatively.
Small interactions continue, but only in the briefest forms. A question answered concisely, a tool handed over, a note of confirmation. Words remain practical, social energy conserved for essential exchanges. You observe these small moments, acknowledging them without distraction. The rhythm of labor remains central, the unchanging framework through which the day unfolds.
The room's light has shifted subtly. Shadows lengthen, stretching across desks, floors, and machinery. The air carries the faint promise of evening, cooler, less intense, marked by a change in both atmosphere and expectation. You notice it instinctively, a signal that the end of your labor is approaching, and with it, a return to rest, warmth, and relative freedom.
Your body, trained through countless repetitions, knows the sequence intimately. Hands, eyes, and posture cooperate almost without thought. You remain alert enough to correct errors, maintain pace, and adhere to standards, yet free enough for small mental observations, minor reflections, and brief acknowledgments of personal discomforts. This is endurance refined, a combination of habit, awareness, and quiet resilience.
Historians still debate whether the gradual winding down of the workday offered genuine relief or simply postponed fatigue until the evening. From your perspective, it is both. A gentle easing of labor that allows a semblance of mental reprieve while demanding continued diligence. The mind and body are partners in survival, aware that completion is near, but that diligence is still required.
As the minutes pass, you find a strange comfort in predictability. The motions are familiar, the outcomes assured, the environment stable. There's reassurance in knowing exactly what is expected, in being able to rely on habit, muscle memory, and routine. Even amidst exhaustion, there is a quiet dignity in the consistency of effort. The final stretch is upon you. You focus on finishing current tasks meticulously, aware that small errors now will reverberate longer than minor missteps earlier in the day. Precision and care remain paramount. The room hums with the collective endurance of every man present, each of you moving steadily toward the quiet closure that is now unmistakably near.
The evening settles in with a gentleness that contrasts sharply with the day's earlier intensity. The air feels cooler, shadows stretch across floors and tables, and the pace of work has subtly softened. You are aware, in a quiet, almost meditative way, that this is the final stretch, the last hour, perhaps the last two, before the day officially concludes. Your body has grown accustomed to motion, your hands almost move automatically, and your mind floats lightly, observing, reflecting, and noticing small details it would have ignored in the earlier frenzy of the day.
For many Victorian men, the end of the workday was anticipated almost as much as it was routine. Labor expectations remained high until the very last minutes, but there was an unspoken awareness among employers
that human energy is finite. Even in the most rigid offices or workshops, a small easing of scrutiny often emerged in the final hours, not necessarily as kindness, but because relentless intensity simply could not be sustained. You feel this subtly now, as a barely perceptible lift in the room's atmosphere.
You notice the small, intimate rhythms of your surroundings. Dust motes drift lazily through the slanting light. Faint sounds echo softly. The scrape of a chair, the scratch of a pen, the low murmur of another man finishing a task. These are familiar cues, comforting in their predictability. You move in tandem with them, aware of the collective rhythm, but attuned primarily to your own motions. Each task is performed with quiet precision, each repetition a silent testament to endurance. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. Some Victorian men marked the approach of evening by subtle personal rituals, straightening a stack of papers one last time, polishing a tool, arranging items in an aesthetically satisfying line. These actions had no practical purpose beyond psychological reassurance. You replicate one of these small gestures unconsciously, enjoying the satisfaction of order, the tiny illusion of control over a day largely governed by routine. Historians still argue whether such small acts materially improved morale or were purely symbolic. You feel their value keenly now. Even a minor sense of accomplishment, a fleeting control over your immediate environment, helps smooth the transition from relentless labor to a quiet evening. It is a reminder that endurance is not just physical, it is mental, even emotional.
The room itself has changed in quality. Light softens, shadows lengthen, and the faint smell of lingering effort, dust, ink, oil, warmth, begins to mix with the cooler evening air seeping through windows. You are acutely aware of these sensory shifts. They signal that the day's weight is lightening, not disappearing entirely, but transforming. Your muscles relax slightly, and the repetitive motions of your hands feel more fluid, less exacting, more graceful in their routine.
You glance at your colleagues. Most are silent, absorbed in their own final tasks. Some exhibit subtle relief, others maintain strict composure, as though finishing without error is more important than comfort. There is no competition here, only shared endurance and tacit acknowledgement of the day's demands. You move among them, aware of this collective rhythm, yet intensely focused on your own work, balancing precision with anticipation.
A light joke surfaces in your mind, quiet and private. If medals were given for monotonous endurance, each Victorian man here would be a champion. The thought eases your fatigue slightly, allowing a small mental smile, a secret companion amid the lingering monotony. Humor, you realize, survives even under the heaviest of routines, a subtle escape mechanism.
Your thoughts drift to dinner, home, warmth, and rest, not in longing exactly, but as gentle motivation. Each movement, each repeated motion, is now measured not only for precision, but for its proximity to completion. You are aware of the clock and its final movements, each tick bringing the day closer to closure. Time feels lighter, almost cooperative. Historians still argue whether this final stretch of the workday was psychologically restorative or simply delayed fatigue until later. You sense that it is a combination of both. The slowing pace, the softer light, the diminishing scrutiny, these elements permit a brief mental reprieve while the body continues to fulfill its obligations. You feel alert enough to work, but relaxed enough to notice and appreciate subtle shifts in environment, movement, and thought.
Your hands finish motions with quiet efficiency. Tasks are completed, items returned to their proper places, papers filed, machines shut down, tools cleaned. There is satisfaction in order, a silent acknowledgement of a day survived. Each small completion offers reassurance, a tangible marker of effort recognized and preserved, even without applause or comment.
As the day finally winds down,
your breathing slows. Posture eases. Minor aches remain, but they are less pressing, absorbed into the comfort of routine's end. The collective hum of the room quiets further, until only soft movements and the occasional low murmur remain. You take a moment to observe the faint shift in air, the final drift of light, the calm settling over bodies and objects alike. You lean back slightly, allowing your shoulders to relax fully, feeling the subtle release of hours of tension. The room is quieter, the light softer, and the air cooler. You notice your hands, no longer tense, resting gently on the surface in front of you. Your eyes follow the faint dance of shadows across familiar objects, and your mind, freed from urgent thought, drifts slowly in tandem. The day has been long, repetitive, demanding, yet you have endured it with quiet patience and subtle discipline. There is comfort in this continuity, reassurance in knowing that effort, habit, and resilience have carried you to this point.
Outside, the evening deepens gently, and though you do not move there physically yet, you sense its presence, the cooling air, the promise of warmth, a return to home, to rest. You breathe slowly, deeply, allowing each inhalation to ease fatigue, and each exhalation to release lingering tension. The world feels expansive, yet soft, the edges of your consciousness folding into quiet reflection. You are aware of your body, your senses, the calm rhythms around you, and you allow yourself to drift with them. The day is complete, though the night is only beginning. You are safe, steady, and whole. The motions of labor have ended, replaced now by the gentle currents of evening. Comfort is near.
Rest is near. Let your thoughts soften, your muscles loosen, and your mind float. You have done what was required, endured what was expected, and now it is time to let go, to relax fully, and to prepare for sleep. The world outside continues, but here, in this quiet, you are free to simply exist. Sweet dreams.